Most Americans know him by one name, Squanto, the native man who helped the Pilgrims survive. The friendly guide, the bridge between two worlds, the man at the edge of the Thanksgiving myth. But almost nobody starts his story where it really begins. Not with corn, not with peace, not with the Pilgrims. It begins with kidnapping, with betrayal, with an English ship. Before he helped Plymouth survive, Tisquantum was taken from his homeland, carried across the Atlantic and sold into slavery. And when he finally found his way home, the world he loved was gone. This is not the comforting story most people were taught. It is darker, more tragic, and far more human. Before he was Squanto, he was Tisquantum of Patuxet. He belonged to a native world that had existed for thousands of years before the English arrived. A world of fishing, farming, diplomacy, kinship, and deep knowledge of the land now called New England. The Wampanoag and their ancestors had long lived in this region. Their communities understood seasonal movement, corn agriculture, coastal trade, and political alliance. This was not an empty frontier waiting for Europeans. It was already a homeland. Tisquantum grew up in that world. We know little about his childhood, but we know enough to understand what was taken from him. Language, family, place, future. And then, in 1614, an English trader named Thomas Hunt turned human beings into cargo. In 1614, Tisquantum was one of about 20 native men from Patuxet taken aboard an English ship by deception. The man responsible was Thomas Hunt. He lured native people aboard under the cover of trade, then sailed them across the Atlantic to sell them into slavery in Spain. That single act changed everything. The kidnapping devastated trust between native communities and Europeans. It deepened fear, it fed anger, and for Tisquantum, it transformed his life into a struggle for survival in a world built by other people's greed. Some accounts say Catholic friars in Spain intervened and helped disrupt the slave sale. Somehow, Tisquantum made his way to England. There, still far from home, he lived in a language not his own, among people not his own, forced to survive by learning the world of his captors. And that is one of the cruelest ironies in American history. The English language that later made him useful to the Pilgrims was learned through violence. In England, Tisquantum lived with or under the control of Englishmen connected to trade and shipping. He learned the language. He observed English customs. He worked around ships and commerce. Some accounts place him in Newfoundland before his eventual return south toward New England. These years are still partially shadowed by uncertainty, but the broad outline is clear. He survived. He adapted. He learned how the English thought, spoke, negotiated, and moved through the world. Those skills would later make him indispensable. But they also came at a terrible cost. Every word of English he learned was a reminder that he was learning it far from home. After roughly 5 years away, Tisquantum returned to Patuxet and found almost nothing. His village had been devastated by epidemic disease. Homes stood empty. Fields were overgrown. The people he knew were gone. The return he had imagined, if he had dared to imagine one at all, had been erased by catastrophe. This is the emotional center of his story. Not the feast, not the alliance, not the legend, the loneliness. He had survived slavery, crossed an ocean, learned a foreign world, and come home only to discover that home itself had been destroyed. When Tisquantum returned, he was no longer simply a man of Patuxet. He was something rarer and more dangerous, a native man who understood English language, English behavior, and English ambition. At first, that made some native people distrust him. According to the Smithsonian, when he returned, a group of Wampanoag took him captive because they did not trust a man who had helped the English. He was taken to Usamakwen, known to the English as Massasoit. But Usamakwen understood something important. A man like Tisquantum could become a weapon, or a bridge, or both. In 1620, the Mayflower arrived in Wampanoag territory. The newcomers were weak, underprepared, and frightened. Disease, winter, and hunger tore through them. Many would not survive their first season. When contact deepened in 1621, Tisquantum entered the story Americans think they know. He helped broker communication, He interpreted. He guided. According to William Bradford's account preserved by Plymouth Patuxet, Tisquantum showed the English how to plant corn, where to find fish, and how to survive in a place they did not understand. And yes, without that knowledge, Plymouth might not have endured. But even that truth is often oversimplified. Because Tisquantum was not just helping strangers. He was moving through a political world of risk, alliance, fear, and self-preservation. This is where the real story becomes complicated. American myth turned Tisquantum into a simple hero, the native friend who helped the Pilgrims and smiled his way into history. But the historical record is far messier. Plymouth Patuxet includes passages from Bradford and Winslow describing Tisquantum as a man who sometimes sought his own advantage, played political games, and tried to increase his power in the eyes of native communities by using his closeness to the English. Some modern Wampanoag perspectives go even further, viewing him not simply as a hero, but as a tragic and morally complex figure whose collaboration with colonizers became part of a much darker future for native peoples. That does not make him less human. It makes him more human. Tisquantum was not a symbol. He was a man trying to survive history. Much of what modern America remembers about Squanto is filtered through Thanksgiving. But even that story is less simple than schoolbook memory. History.com notes that the famous 1621 harvest gathering likely was not the neat, invited Thanksgiving many later Americans imagined. It unfolded in a tense colonial setting, shaped by armed men, uncertainty, diplomacy, and mutual calculation. And Tisquantum's place in that moment was not the cheerful mascot of a national holiday. He was a survivor of kidnapping, a man displaced by plague, a translator between unequal worlds, a political actor in a dangerous frontier of empire. That is the harder truth, and it deserves to be told. Tisquantum did not live long after helping Plymouth. In 1622 he died. Some sources describe fever. Others note later speculation that he may have been poisoned, though that remains uncertain. What is certain is this: he died carrying more than one world inside him. Patuxet and England, survival and loss, diplomacy and mistrust, usefulness and loneliness. And maybe that is why his story endures. Not because it is simple, but because it isn't. If this story changed the way you see Squanto, leave a comment, subscribe, and share this documentary. Because the truth is not that a native man helped the Pilgrims. The truth is that a man survived enslavement, returned to a shattered homeland, and still became one of the most consequential figures in early colonial America.